Revenge. With Zara. Nobody believed kindness could destroy him until this very moment. The conference room was silent, yet the tension was deafening. Every eye in the office was locked on Eric, the man who once strutted through these halls with arrogance, his voice always the loudest in the room. But today, that voice trembled. His hands shook as he flipped through the printed reports, searching desperately for a defense that wasn't there. On the projector screen behind him, the truth glared in black and white: emails, contracts, and timelines that exposed every manipulation he had orchestrated. The same colleagues who once laughed at his jokes and followed his orders now leaned back in their chairs, arms crossed, faces full of betrayal. Some whispered under their breath. Others shook their heads slowly, almost savoring the fall of the man they had feared. Eric cleared his throat, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, sweat glistening at his temples. "You can't really believe." But the evidence silenced him. His lies were stacked against him like bricks forming a wall, and every attempt to climb out only dragged him deeper into humiliation. The more he spoke, the smaller he became. And then, across the table, she sat. Maya. Calm. Composed. A soft smile playing at her lips, not triumphant, not mocking, but serene. The same smile she had worn when Eric stole her ideas, when he mocked her kindness, when he built his empire on her silence. Now, that very silence was louder than his shouting. Her presence, her dignity, was dismantling him piece by piece. She hadn't said a word, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't lifted a finger against him. Yet the room already knew who had won. A colleague muttered, just loud enough for others to hear, "Unbelievable, she didn't even fight back." Another replied, "No, she didn't need to." The boss, normally composed, leaned forward, his tone sharper than steel. "Eric, your actions speak for themselves. You betrayed this company, your team, and your own integrity." The words landed like a final hammer strike, leaving Eric pale and speechless. All the while, Maya's eyes never left him. There was no bitterness in them, no hatred. Only quiet strength. A strength no one had believed in, until now. The office would never forget this moment. The downfall of arrogance, undone not by fury, but by kindness. And though the climax had arrived, the question burned hotter than ever: how did she do it? Before the chaos of the boardroom and the public unraveling of Eric's lies, Maya lived in a different rhythm, quiet, steady, often invisible. She was the kind of employee who arrived before the lights even warmed the office hallways and left long after the night cleaning crew had begun their rounds. Her desk, tucked into the corner, was always stacked with files that didn't technically belong to her. Whenever a teammate made a mistake, Maya was the one to stay late, fixing errors no one else would own. She didn't complain, didn't seek credit, she simply did the work. To her, diligence wasn't just a habit, it was a form of self-respect. But in the politics of the corporate world, kindness has a dangerous way of being misread. Her colleagues whispered that she was too soft, that she lacked the sharpness to climb the ladder. When promotions came, her name was rarely in the room. Instead, it was Eric's. Eric, the office charmer. Smooth words, a quick smile, and a talent for taking credit at the exact right moment. He had an uncanny way of making people believe he was indispensable, even when the heavy lifting had been done by others. By Maya. He knew how to dazzle in meetings, how to play the game. And while Maya sat quietly at the end of the table, Eric stole her ideas, polished them with theatrics, and sold them as his own. Still, Maya didn't let bitterness consume her. She had dreams, not of power for its own sake, but of growth, respect, and a future where her work was recognized. She believed in the long game, that integrity would someday speak louder than charm. Yet each time she watched Eric celebrated for what she had built in silence, doubt crept in. Was kindness really just weakness in disguise? Her coworkers didn't help. "Maya's too nice," they would say with a smirk. "She'll never survive in this environment." Others shrugged, "That's just how it works here." the loud ones win. Every comment was a sting, a reminder that the values she held close might be the very chains holding her down. And yet, deep inside, she held on. She poured herself into helping others, coaching new hires, lending a hand on impossible deadlines, creating allies without even realizing it. Small gestures that seemed invisible in the moment, but were quietly planting seeds. What no one knew, not even Maya herself, was that these seeds of loyalty and respect would one day grow into the forest that shielded her and suffocated Eric. But for now, the storm was still building, quietly and unseen. The office buzzed with ambition and politics, and Eric thrived in that chaos. Maya remained overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. And that's exactly what made her dangerous. For the betrayal she never saw coming would be the spark that turned her silence into a weapon. The project had been Maya's lifeline. For months, she poured herself into the proposal, a new system to streamline client communication, reduce delays, and save the company thousands. She ran the numbers, designed the flowcharts, polished every detail late into the night while the rest of the office had long gone home. It was her chance, finally, to prove herself. On the morning of the presentation, Maya felt a nervous spark of hope. She'd spent weeks rehearsing her slides, making sure every question could be answered. But as the team gathered in the glass-walled boardroom, she noticed something unusual. Eric had a thick folder in front of him. Her folder. When the meeting began, her heart sank. Eric stood up, clicked the remote, and her slides filled the screen. The words she had crafted. The diagrams she had stayed late to perfect. He presented them with his trademark charisma, pacing confidently, laughing at just the right moments, selling her work as if it had always been his. Maya sat frozen, her chest tight. She wanted to speak, to correct him, but every time she opened her mouth, Eric moved swiftly to the next slide, drowning her out with charm. Her boss leaned forward, nodding with interest. Impressive work, Eric. This is exactly the kind of forward-thinking initiative we've been waiting for. A hollow ache spread in Maya's chest. Every syllable of praise hit like a blade. The idea that had kept her awake at night, the idea she believed might finally give her a voice, stolen in plain sight. The room erupted in admiration. Colleagues murmured their approval, clapping Eric on the back as he concluded with a confident smile. No one looked at Maya. No one even remembered she was in the room. Yet the whispers came later. By the coffee machine, in the hallway, hushed voices carried guilt and pity. She worked on that project, didn't she? Everyone knows it was Maya's. She deserved the credit, not him. But whispers never changed promotions. And a week later, the announcement came: Eric was promoted. His grin stretched wide as the boss shook his hand in front of the entire office. Applause echoed, the kind that forced Maya to clap too, though her palms felt numb. Inside, she shattered. Her dream, recognition, respect, growth, was stripped from her, and given to the man who had stolen it all. She thought of the nights she had missed dinners, the weekends sacrificed, the fatigue she had pushed through. All of it, erased with Eric's smooth voice. And yet, when he turned toward her, soaking in his victory, Maya forced a smile. She congratulated him, her voice steady, though her heart was breaking. Congratulations, Eric. Well deserved. Her colleagues looked at her with quiet awe. How could she be so gracious? How could she offer kindness when betrayal was burning her alive? They saw weakness. But Maya knew the truth, this wasn't weakness. It was endurance. What Eric didn't see, what no one could yet imagine, was that Maya's calm acceptance was the beginning of something much larger. For though Eric had stolen the promotion, he had also made his most fatal mistake, underestimating the woman he thought too soft to fight back. For now, the office celebrated him. For now, Maya smiled. But deep inside, a storm had started, and its thunder was waiting. The weeks after Eric's promotion felt like a slow suffocation for Maya. The air in the office grew heavier with every passing day, thick with tension and unspoken words. Eric wasted no time stepping into his new role. With the confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable, he made sure everyone remembered who sat at the top. Meetings that once included Maya suddenly excluded her. She would arrive at the conference room only to see the door already closed, muffled voices inside discussing projects she had once spearheaded. If she asked about it later, Eric would smile, tilt his head, and say, "Oh, sorry, Maya. It must have been an oversight. You understand." But it was never an oversight. It was deliberate. Her contributions, once the backbone of the department, were now ignored or dismissed. When she presented ideas, Eric interrupted with a wave of his hand, steering the discussion elsewhere. "That's a good thought," he'd say, patronizing, "but let's stick to more practical strategies." The sting of his words always landed heavier because they echoed through the room in front of their colleagues, leaving Maya standing alone in awkward silence. What hurt more was the shift in how others treated her. Colleagues who once leaned on her expertise now avoided her gaze. They didn't want to be caught siding with the woman Eric had effectively pushed into the shadows. To them, Maya had become invisible. Outside of work, the toll was even sharper. The promotion had been her hope, a lifeline to finally pay off her student loans, to move out of her cramped apartment with the leaky ceiling and into something that felt like home. She had dreamed of sending money back to her parents, giving them some relief after years of sacrifice. Instead, she now sat at her kitchen table, staring at overdue bills, the flickering light above her mirroring the uncertainty inside her chest. Everywhere she turned, there were reminders of what she had lost. Her alarm rang earlier each morning, but she no longer woke with purpose. She dragged herself to the mirror, staring at the reflection of a woman whose shoulders slumped, whose eyes carried dark circles from sleepless nights replaying the betrayal. She asked herself over and over, was I foolish for trusting? Was I naive for believing kindness mattered here? The loneliness cut deeper than the betrayal. In the quiet of her apartment, she realized how small her circle was. Friends were busy, colleagues had abandoned her, and even her parents, though loving, didn't fully understand the cruelty of office politics. The silence was deafening. Eric, meanwhile, thrived. His voice echoed louder in the halls. He walked past her desk without acknowledgement, only stopping when he wanted something trivial done. "Maya, could you handle these numbers for me?" he'd say, tossing files onto her desk as if she were his assistant. Every small slight chipped away at her, leaving her raw and questioning her own worth. The worst moment came one Friday afternoon. A large client visited the office, and Maya knew the project being discussed had originally been hers. She had built the foundation, nurtured the client relationship, and mapped out the entire rollout plan. Yet, as the meeting began, Eric cut her out completely. He presented her work, again, without even a mention of her name. And this time, he went further. "Luckily, my team has been able to correct some of the mistakes Maya left behind," he said smoothly, his words sliding like venom across the polished table. The client nodded sympathetically, glancing at Maya with polite pity. Her chest burned. It wasn't just theft anymore, it was humiliation. He was rewriting the story of her competence, painting her as careless, weak, dispensable. That night, Maya sat on the edge of her bed, shoes still on, staring blankly at the wall. The city lights bled through the window, but she barely noticed. Her heart felt hollow, her mind a storm of doubts. Maybe Eric was right. Maybe she didn't belong in this world of cutthroat ambition. Maybe kindness was weakness. For the first time, she considered quitting. Walking away from the company, the dreams, the endless uphill climb. She thought of packing a box, leaving her badge on the desk, disappearing into anonymity where the pain couldn't follow. But then, something shifted. As tears blurred her vision, her gaze fell on the stack of old notebooks by her desk. Pages filled with her ideas, her notes, her plans. Proof of her brilliance, her effort, her persistence. She picked one up, fingers tracing the ink, and for the first time in weeks, a faint spark flickered inside her. Yes, she was broken. Yes, she had been humiliated. But buried beneath the ashes of defeat was something Eric could never touch. Her ideas. Her resilience. Her kindness, the very thing he mocked, still lived in her, stubborn and unyielding. The world saw her as finished. Eric believed he had crushed her. Her colleagues had written her off. But what they didn't know, the very thing they dismissed would become her greatest weapon. Maya woke the next morning with a heaviness still clinging to her chest, but the faint spark from the night before hadn't faded. It lingered, fragile yet undeniable. For the first time in weeks, she chose not to drown in bitterness but to rise with quiet determination. Instead of plotting fiery words or imagining confrontations with Eric, she did something unexpected. She turned her attention toward others. The interns were the first to notice. Maya began stopping by their desks, offering patient guidance where no one else bothered. She showed them shortcuts on the systems, explained the reasoning behind client strategies, and reminded them that mistakes were part of learning. Her kindness was not flashy or loud, it was steady, grounding, the kind that made the overlooked feel seen. Soon, whispers began to shift. "Maya helped me finish this report," one intern told another. "She stayed late to explain the numbers to me." What Eric dismissed as weakness was becoming something else entirely: loyalty. It didn't stop there. A junior analyst, nervous about presenting to a client, found Maya by her side the evening before, rehearsing lines with her, giving her the confidence to stand tall. A designer struggling to meet a deadline discovered Maya quietly helping with drafts after hours. Her apartment lights still flickered at night, bills still piled on her table, but in the office, Maya was slowly rebuilding her presence, not through authority, but through influence. And people noticed. Her colleagues began seeking her out again, first timidly, then more openly. They trusted her with frustrations, confided their struggles, and in those moments, Maya saw what Eric could never see: true power wasn't in the title on your door, it was in the loyalty of those who believed in you. It wasn't revenge in the way movies showed it, no slammed doors or fiery speeches. Instead, it was subtle, deliberate, like seeds being planted in the dark soil. Every kind gesture, every piece of advice, every late-night effort was a seed, and Maya knew that in time, they would grow into something Eric would never anticipate. Eric, of course, brushed it all off. He still strutted through the office, soaking in the applause of higher-ups who remained blind to his manipulations. But beneath the surface, the foundation of his power was beginning to crack. His arrogance blinded him to the quiet shift happening under his nose. For Maya, the change was not just in others, it was in herself. She no longer walked with slumped shoulders. Her eyes, once dim with exhaustion, now carried a calm focus. She wasn't chasing Eric anymore, she was building something greater than him. There were still nights of doubt, still mornings when the weight of injustice pressed against her chest. But instead of breaking her, it fueled her. She told herself, "I don't need to fight with fists or fury. Patience is my weapon. Kindness is my blade." The suspense lay not in what she was doing, but in what she wasn't. She wasn't fighting back in the way Eric expected. She wasn't plotting his downfall openly. She wasn't loud, vengeful, or reckless. Instead, she was biding her time, crafting a story where her dignity would outlast his deceit. And though no one could see it yet, the tide was turning. Because what Eric didn't understand, what he would never understand, was that the very thing he mocked in Maya was the thing that would destroy him. She wasn't fighting with fists. She wasn't fighting with anger. She was fighting with patience. Maya's decision to rise again wasn't marked by fireworks or dramatic declarations. It was quiet, almost invisible at first. But like a chess player plotting moves far ahead, she began to lay out a plan, not with bitterness, but with precision. Her first step was simple. She turned her attention to the people Eric had wronged. There were plenty. The junior analyst Eric once mocked for stuttering during a client call. The designer he had publicly embarrassed over a missed detail. The assistant he often treated as if she were invisible. Maya, with her calm presence, began seeking them out, not to complain about Eric, but to listen, to encourage, to remind them of their worth. "Don't let one man's arrogance define your talent," she told the analyst, her voice steady, lifting his chin. "You're better than the way he talks to you," she whispered to the designer, staying late to help polish a campaign draft. These weren't grand gestures, but they left marks deeper than Eric's cruelty ever could. Slowly, those colleagues began to lean on her. And though Eric still wore the crown of authority, it was Maya people trusted when they needed guidance. The irony was delicious, and invisible to Eric. Each day, she wove another strand into her web. She took on the projects no one wanted, not to earn credit but to build trust. She gave credit freely, ensuring her teammates felt seen. She stayed late, not because she had to, but because she knew someone would notice, not the bosses, but the ones who mattered. And they did notice. Soon, her desk became the quiet center of the office. If someone had a question, they went to Maya first. If someone needed advice, they asked her. If someone needed encouragement before a presentation, they sought her reassurance. Without ever holding a title, Maya was becoming the office's true leader. Meanwhile, Eric was too busy basking in his borrowed glory to realize what was happening beneath him. He strutted through the halls, convinced his power was absolute. He mistook obedience for loyalty, fear for respect. The bosses saw his confidence, but they didn't see the subtle shift in the room, the way eyes drifted toward Maya during tense meetings, the way people trusted her judgment more than his. The audience, though, could see it clearly. Every act of compassion Maya extended was a piece of her master plan. Each small kindness was a seed of rebellion. The dramatic irony was sharp. We could see the storm forming, but Eric, blind in arrogance, could not. Still, Maya's patience was tested. There were moments when Eric tried to humiliate her further, like when he interrupted her mid-sentence in a meeting, waving her off as though her thoughts were trivial. But instead of lashing out, Maya simply smiled, letting silence hang heavy. Her colleagues noticed the dignity in her restraint, the stark contrast to Eric's arrogance. Eric began to sense something was off. Whispers reached his ears, small, almost insignificant, but enough to spark paranoia. He noticed more laughter around Maya's desk, more people lingering by her side. He noticed the interns crediting her, not him, for their growth. At night, he replayed moments, wondering why the office atmosphere felt different, though he couldn't put his finger on it. But arrogance won over doubt. Maya's too weak, he told himself, sipping his drink at a rooftop bar. She'll never be a threat. And that was his fatal mistake. Because while Eric dismissed her, Maya was shaping something far more powerful than a promotion: unity. She started inviting colleagues for casual coffee after work, not as strategy sessions, but as moments of connection. She listened to their frustrations, laughed with them, encouraged them. She was building more than a network, she was building a community. One evening, when the junior analyst confessed, "Sometimes I feel like quitting because of Eric," Maya leaned in and said, "Don't give him that power. We'll get through this together." The words echoed louder than she realized. Together. Her colleagues began repeating it, together, when they faced Eric's dismissive remarks or when they felt belittled. Slowly, the office climate shifted. The once isolated coworkers now had a silent bond, one rooted not in rebellion, but in loyalty to the woman who had shown them kindness. It was then that Maya realized her master plan wasn't about revenge alone. It was about rewriting the very culture Eric had poisoned. Eric, blind to this revolution, continued to believe he had everyone under his thumb. But cracks began to show. A client praised Maya during a meeting, bypassing Eric entirely. A presentation she helped prepare earned applause Eric tried to claim, but everyone in the room knew the truth. He started to lose his grip, though he still laughed it off, still mocked Maya in private. "She's nothing without me," he told another manager, the words laced with desperation he couldn't admit. The audience, watching, could feel the suspense building. Eric's empire was rotting from the inside, but he couldn't smell the decay. Every act of kindness from Maya was another strike against him, another step toward his downfall. Maya knew she wasn't ready yet. Revenge wasn't about a single act, it was about timing. And she would wait until the moment was perfect, until the web she'd spun was so tight Eric couldn't escape. For now, she remained calm, composed, steady. But behind that calm smile, behind those patient eyes, the master plan was in motion. And soon, the man who thought kindness was weakness would learn the truth. Kindness wasn't her weakness. It was her weapon. The storm Maya had patiently built finally arrived, not by her hand, but by Eric's own arrogance. It began with a high-stakes client meeting. A global partner, the kind that could make or break quarterly revenue, had been growing frustrated for weeks. Eric had promised results, but his charm had begun to wear thin. Deadlines were missed, reports were sloppy, and the client's patience had snapped. That morning, the conference room was buzzing with tension. Executives lined the long glass table, assistants shuffled papers nervously, and the client's representative sat stiffly, her expression sharp and unforgiving. Eric walked in late, grinning, adjusting his designer tie as if his confidence alone could save him. "Let's not waste time," the client snapped, her voice like a blade. "We've given you chance after chance, Eric. Deliver, or we walk." The air tightened. Everyone's eyes darted to Eric. For the first time, he didn't look in control. His words stumbled, his excuses tangled. Charts on the screen contradicted his claims. And then, the silence was broken by the client's next words, words that cut through the room like thunder. "We'd prefer to speak with Maya." The room froze. Maya, who had been quietly taking notes at the corner of the table, lifted her head. Her calm eyes met the client's gaze. Eric blinked, his mouth opening, but no words came. "Excuse me," he croaked. The client leaned forward. "Maya has been the only one consistently sending us clear updates. She understands the project better than anyone. If we're staying, we want her leading, not you." The shift was seismic. In a single breath, the balance of power tipped. The executives glanced at one another, some nodding almost imperceptibly. They had known for weeks who truly carried the team, but now it was undeniable. Eric's face flushed crimson. She's an assistant," he sputtered, trying to laugh it off. "I'm the project lead." But the client's glare silenced him. Titles mean nothing when results don't follow. Either Maya leads, or this deal is over. Maya rose slowly, not with arrogance, but with poise. "I'll be glad to step in," she said softly, her voice steady yet powerful. The room erupted in murmurs. Eric's fists clenched against the table. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "She's been sabotaging me, that's what's happening. She's been plotting this all along." His outburst echoed through the glass walls, heads turning from outside the conference room. The executive stiffened, his mask was slipping. Maya didn't flinch. She simply looked at him with the same serene kindness that had disarmed so many before. "Eric, I've never needed to sabotage you," she said gently. "Your actions have spoken louder than anything I could ever do." It was the truth, and it shattered him. The silence that followed was deafening. Every colleague, every executive, every client representative saw Eric for what he was, a man undone by his own arrogance. One by one, the allies he thought he commanded looked away. The analyst he once mocked avoided his gaze. The designer he humiliated stared at Maya with admiration. Even the executives, once swayed by his bravado, now seemed embarrassed to have ever trusted him. Eric lashed out again, voice cracking. "You're all blind. She's weak. She doesn't deserve this." But his words only highlighted the contrast. Maya stood calm, composed, steady as stone, while he raged like a man drowning. The more he fought, the smaller he looked. The client delivered the final blow. "If she's weak, then perhaps weakness is exactly what this company needs, because strength without integrity is nothing." The room fell into silence again, but this time it was filled with weight, with judgment. And in that silence, Eric crumbled. His chair screeched as he stumbled back, sweat beading on his forehead, muttering excuses no one listened to. His empire, the authority he had stolen, the fear he had thrived on, collapsed in a single afternoon, not because Maya attacked, but because no one stood with him anymore. And all the while, Maya simply watched. Calm. Composed. Her faint smile returned, not of mockery, but of peace. The catharsis was undeniable. The audience watching this unfold would feel it in their bones. Justice had arrived, not with fists or fury, but with patience, dignity, and truth. When the meeting ended, the client shook Maya's hand firmly, ignoring Eric entirely. "You're the reason we're still here," she said. The executives followed, one after another, turning to Maya with respect they had never shown before. Eric stood alone in the corner, invisible in the very room he once commanded. It was over. The man who thought kindness was weakness had been destroyed by it. And Maya? She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. She simply walked out of that room with her head high, leaving Eric behind in the ruins of his own arrogance. The sweetest revenge had been delivered, not with fire, but with grace. The echoes of that fateful meeting didn't fade overnight, they rippled through the office, the industry, even the quiet corners where gossip thrived. By the end of the week, everyone knew what had happened. Not just the executives in the glass conference room, not just the client who demanded Maya's leadership, but every intern, every assistant, every employee who had ever whispered in hushed tones about Eric's rise. "She didn't fight him," one whispered near the break room. "She didn't need to," another replied. "She forgave him, and she won." The story spread like wildfire, the tale of the woman who brought down arrogance without raising her voice. Maya's calm smile in the face of Eric's rage became legendary, retold in elevator rides, over coffee cups, in emails passed like secrets. Even people outside the company began to hear fragments, clients from other firms asking, "Is it true? Did Eric really collapse while she stood there, silent and strong?" For Maya, life began to shift. The same colleagues who once dismissed her kindness now sought her advice. Interns she mentored openly praised her. Senior managers who never learned her name suddenly greeted her with respect. There was a gravity about her now, a quiet authority that required no title to enforce. The irony was sharp. Eric had the promotion, the title, the corner office, but Maya had the loyalty. And loyalty proved far more powerful. Eric, on the other hand, was a ghost. He still occupied his office, but the hallway outside was silent now. The people who once laughed at his jokes now avoided his gaze. Meetings where his voice once dominated now ended with awkward silences. His charm had evaporated, leaving only desperation. He tried to regain ground, sending late-night emails filled with orders, cornering employees to demand loyalty, but nobody responded. His words, once sharp arrows, now bounced off a wall of indifference. Even his allies, the ones who benefited from his manipulation, drifted away. They had seen the truth, and the truth was undeniable. Eric's strength was hollow, and Maya's kindness had revealed it. The validation Maya had longed for wasn't loud or flashy. It came in quiet moments, a thank you from a coworker she once stayed late to help, a nod from a manager who had overlooked her before, the relieved smile of an intern who knew she had someone to trust. These gestures built something greater than revenge, they built respect. And yet, Maya never gloated. She never mentioned the conference room showdown, never rubbed Eric's failure in his face. Her silence was its own statement. She carried herself with the same dignity she always had, only now, people finally recognized it. Eric sat in isolation. The man who once thrived on attention now found himself invisible. Colleagues who once admired his smooth words crossed the hall to avoid him. Even the bosses, who once showered him with praise, kept conversations short, their disappointment palpable. The empire he built on arrogance had crumbled, leaving him stranded in its ruins. But Maya's story was not finished. The office buzzed not only with admiration, but with speculation. What will she do next, they wondered. Some thought she would push for Eric's position. Others believed she'd leave altogether, rising to a company that valued her properly. What nobody expected was what came next. Something that would prove, once and for all, that revenge isn't always about anger. Because Maya's greatest victory wasn't the humiliation of Eric, or even the respect she had earned. It was what she chose to do with her power after the dust settled, and that choice would leave everyone speechless. In the weeks that followed, the company settled into a new rhythm. The shock of Eric's collapse lingered, but the energy had shifted away from fear, away from politics, towards something steadier. Maya had not just survived, she had transformed the culture around her. There was a quiet poetry in the way things resolved. Eric's arrogance, once towering, had collapsed under its own weight. The very traits he believed made him powerful, manipulation, intimidation, control, had betrayed him. Without loyalty, he was nothing but an empty title in an empty office. Maya, by contrast, had chosen a path that most underestimated. Kindness. Patience. Consistency. In a world that mistook softness for weakness, she proved that true strength required neither cruelty nor noise. She had planted seeds over months, and now the harvest was undeniable: respect, stability, freedom. Her colleagues no longer saw her as the nice one who would never fight back. They saw her as the leader she had always been, someone who could shoulder responsibility without crushing others, someone who could stand firm without raising her voice. Kindness, in her hands, had been sharper than any blade. For Maya, the victory was not about Eric's downfall, though justice felt earned, not forced. It was about reclaiming her own narrative. She no longer needed to prove herself by tearing someone else down. She had shown, through patience and principle, that character outlasts ego. Eric's presence diminished further with each passing day. Some whispered he might resign, others claimed he already had offers elsewhere. But his shadow no longer loomed large. His name, once a force in the office, became little more than a cautionary tale. People no longer spoke of his victories, only his unraveling. Maya, however, carried no bitterness. When asked how she felt about what happened, she only said, "I didn't beat him. I just kept being myself." That humility became her greatest power. The story of Maya's rise became more than office gossip. It became a parable repeated in quiet tones, that you don't need to mirror cruelty to overcome it, that revenge does not have to mean destruction. Sometimes, the sweetest justice comes not from anger, but from integrity. In the end, Maya had not fought Eric at all. She had let him fight himself, and he lost. And in that truth lay the lesson: kindness was never weakness. It was the strongest weapon she ever carried. And so, Maya's story reminds us of something unforgettable: when kindness became her weapon, it became the sweetest revenge. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't plot destruction, and yet she stood victorious while arrogance crumbled. Her journey shows us that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it's quiet. Sometimes, it's patient. Sometimes, it's a smile that refuses to break, even when the world doubts you. Maya's revenge wasn't about crushing her enemy. It was about proving that character, compassion, and resilience outlast every scheme. Now the question is, what about you? If you were in Maya's shoes, could you have had the patience to wait, to build, to let kindness win? Or would you have struck back in anger? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your answer in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and powerful tales of justice and revenge, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. This is Revenge with Zara, where every story proves the strongest victories come when you least expect them. Stay tuned, the next one might just change how you see revenge forever.